Picture a country that considers itself the most civilized, most medically advanced, most morally refined nation on the face of the earth. Now fill it with women who are secretly bleeding into folded scraps of wool, flannel pinned to a belt made of cotton tape, terrified that the smell is going to give them away, unable to wash themselves properly for fear that the water will drive the blood back inside their bodies and kill them. Add the very real possibility that a doctor will prescribe complete bed rest for 5 days every month as the medically responsible thing to do, that touching a salted ham will supposedly cause it to rot, that cold water touching certain parts of you will supposedly cause madness, that the very fact of what your body is doing must never, under any circumstances, be named aloud in polite company, not even by its most clinical term, not even when the person you need to speak to is your own mother. That's Victorian England, the empire on which the sun never sets, the country of Dickens and Darwin and the Great Exhibition, and Florence Nightingale and public sanitation reform, and an absolute bone-deep, civilization-wide conviction that women's bodies were dangerous, unpredictable, and fundamentally disgusting for approximately 5 days out of every 28. We're going back there tonight, not as historians looking at it from the comfortable distance of a textbook, not as tourists walking past the pretty Victorian architecture. We're living it. One woman, one cycle, everything she would have felt and smelled and hidden and survived. So, I make these history stories, and honestly I've started to notice that a significant portion of you are probably only here because the idea of hearing about Victorian uterine theories while you drift off to sleep is, for reasons I don't fully understand, deeply soothing. Either that or you're just the kind of person who can't sleep unless someone is telling you something genuinely horrifying about how women in corsets managed to get through their working days while secretly convinced their bodies were poisoning them from the inside. Either way, I'm not judging. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. You know before you open your eyes, that's the thing nobody tells you. Or rather, it's the thing that every woman who's ever lived knows but that nobody writes down. Nobody acknowledges, nobody discusses over the breakfast table or in polite correspondence. You know before you open your eyes because your body knows first, down in the cramping pull of your lower back, down in the heaviness of your belly that feels as though someone has filled it with warm sand overnight. And for a moment, that half-second of confusion between sleeping and waking, you don't quite remember where you are. Then it hits you. Not just the cramping, though, that's already settling in like a hand pressing firmly against your spine from the inside. Not just the familiar weight in your pelvis that means your body is doing what it does whether you want it to or not. The smell. It's faint still, barely a breath of iron and warmth rising from beneath the thin cotton sheet, but you know it. You've known it since you were 13 years old, and your mother pressed a folded cloth into your hands and said, very quietly, as if the words themselves were shameful, that you were to tell no one. No one, not your father, not your brothers, not even your closest friend unless you had to, and you had better pray that you never had to. You lie still for a moment longer than you should. The attic room is cold, November cold, the kind that settles into the floorboards and seeps up through the single thin blanket that the Hartley Fen household has deemed sufficient for the staff quarters. The window above your cot is a small, mean square of grey London sky, already the colour of old pewter, even though it can't be past 5 in the morning. Somewhere below you, 3 floors down through plaster and timber and thick carpeting you are not allowed to walk on, the house is beginning to stir. You can hear the distant sound of a coal scuttle being dragged across a stone floor in the basement kitchen. That's Bridget, the scullery maid. She starts earlier than anyone. You have 40 minutes before you need to be downstairs. 40 minutes. Your stomach cramps again, a slow rolling wave of it that makes you press your lips together and breathe through your nose until it passes. You sit up carefully, the way you always do on the first morning, the way every woman does, the instinctive physical caution of a body that knows it is now unreliable, in a very specific and embarrassing way. The sheet is clean, thank God. You check in the dim grey light, running your fingers along the cotton, and it's clean. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Small mercy. You reach under the iron bed frame, past the wooden box where you keep your Sunday clothes, to the loose board. There's a trick to it. A slight angle you have to get the tips of your fingers under, and then it comes up quiet as you like. In the space beneath is a tin box that used to hold biscuits, and inside that tin box is what you need. The rags. You've got 6 of them, folded into neat rectangles, cotton flannel, washed and dried and folded so carefully that someone might almost mistake them for handkerchiefs if they didn't look too closely. You've also got the belt. It's a strip of wide cotton tape, maybe 2 inches across, with small brass rings sewn to each end. You made it yourself from remnants salvaged from Mrs. Hartley Fenn's sewing room after a dressmaking session, and you're quietly proud of the stitching, even though it is an object you never intend to show to another living soul. You also have a small bottle, brown glass with a cork stopper, lavender water mostly, but you've mixed in a few drops of vinegar because someone told you once that it helps with the smell, and you absolutely cannot be the kind of maid whose mistress notices something is off. Not in this household. Not under Mrs. Hartley Fenn's nose, which is both metaphorically and literally very sensitive. You stand up slowly. The cold hits you immediately, climbing from the floorboards, up through your bare feet, up your legs, settling somewhere in your already unhappy lower abdomen, like a second insult on top of the first. The water in your basin is cold. You poured it last night from the can in the corridor, and it has been sitting in this unheated room for approximately 8 hours, and it is now, technically, almost ice. You look at it, and here is the thing that will govern this entire day and the 4 or 5 days that follow. The thing that is not a personal quirk or a private superstition, but a medical fact, endorsed by physicians, agreed upon by mothers, written down in domestic advice manuals and pamphlets on women's health, and spoken with total confidence by the kind of doctor who charges 6 shillings for a consultation. You cannot wash, not properly, not the way you want to, not the way your body is telling you, with increasing urgency, that would very much like you to. Because the cold water will stop the flow, and if the flow stops, if it is interrupted, if your body's necessary and natural process is in any way disrupted by the shock of cold water, the blood will not simply stop and wait politely until conditions improve. No, the blood will turn back. It will be reabsorbed. It will find its way into your bloodstream, into your brain, into your lungs. It will cause inflammation of the uterus, which can lead to peritonitis, which can lead to death. It will cause inflammation of the stomach, which can lead to rupture. It will cause, and this is perhaps the most frequently repeated warning in the entire literature on the subject, mental disturbance, hysteria, madness. You've been told this so many times and in so many different ways that it no longer feels like a rule to you. It feels like gravity, like the fact that fire is hot and standing in the rain makes you wet. Your body during these days is fragile. Your body is doing something volatile and dangerous. The only sensible thing to do is to disturb it as little as possible, to keep warm, to rest when you can, to manage the outward symptoms with as much discretion and dignity as the situation allows, and above all, above absolutely everything else, to not let the cold water stop the blood. This is not, as it will turn out, medically accurate. But you don't know that yet. Nobody you trust has suggested otherwise. And even if they had, even if someone had sat you down and calmly explained that cold water cannot in fact cause your menstrual blood to be reabsorbed into your brain, you're not certain you would believe them, because the alternative, which is washing your entire lower half in freezing November water at 5 a.m. in an unheated attic room while already cramping, is not particularly appealing anyway. So you wash your face, just your face. You dip your fingers in the basin and press them against your cheeks and forehead and the back of your neck, and the cold is sharp enough to make you wince. You wash your hands. You clean your teeth with the small pot of tooth powder on the windowsill, and then you manage everything else with the lavender water and a clean scrap of cloth, and the most efficient, most minimal, most careful series of actions you have practiced until they take up almost no time at all. You do not think about it. You have learned not to think about it. Your name is Agnes Whitmore. You're 22 years old. You've been in service since you were 15, first as a housemaid in Guildford, then as a parlour maid in a family in Surrey, and for the past 3 years as lady's maid to Mrs. Caroline Hartley Fenn of number 14, Pelham Crescent, South Kensington. It is November of 1882. Outside the thin panes of your attic window, London is producing its usual morning fog, a mixture of coal smoke and damp and the particular grey exhalation of a city of 4 million people, all starting their day at roughly the same moment. You are, by any reasonable measure, one of the lucky ones. You have steady employment. Your wages are £12 per year, which is on the higher end for a lady's maid in a household of this type, and which you are careful enough with that you've managed to save nearly £4 of it in the past year. You're not hungry. You're not sleeping in a lodging house with 8 other women. You have a private room, even if it is cold and small and smells slightly of mice. But right now, at 5:45 on a November morning, with the cramp settling into a dull rhythmic ache that is going to be your constant companion for the next 4 days at minimum, you're thinking very clearly about all the ways in which being lucky does not actually make any of this easier. The belt goes on first. You tie it around your waist over your chemise, threading the tapes through the rings, adjusting the fit until it sits snug enough to hold the cloth in place but not so tight that will dig into your skin by midday. Then the rag, folded double, threaded through the front and back loops of the belt, pinned at each end with the 2 large pins you keep in the tin box specifically for this purpose. You press the whole arrangement flat against your body, running your hands along the outside to check there are no awkward bulges, no edges that might show through the layers of petticoat. You're about to put on your corset, your petticoats, your working dress, your apron, your collar, your cuffs. You're about to become the immaculate, invisible, efficient Agnes Whitmore who glides through the Hartley Fenn household with the quietly competent manner that Mrs. Hartley Fenn pays £12 a year for. But first, for just a moment, you sit on the edge of your cot in the grey November morning and let yourself feel, without apology, how much your back hurts. It radiates from somewhere deep in your pelvis, this particular ache, spreading up through your lower spine and around to your hips. It is not dramatic pain. It is not the kind of thing that would make you gasp or cry out. It is just present, steady, insistent, the kind of pain that doesn't incapacitate you but also never lets you forget it is there. The kind of pain you're expected to carry invisibly, without comment, without accommodation, through a 12 to 14-hour working day. You breathe through it, then you get dressed. The corset laces take a moment because your hands are still cold, the tips of your fingers clumsy with the chill. You do it mostly by touch, threading the lace through the eyelets with the particular efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. The boning presses against your already tender abdomen, and you wince slightly and then adjust, pulling the lace a fraction looser than you normally would. Just a fraction. Just enough to make breathing possible. Your dress is dark grey wool, sensible and sturdy and not remotely flattering, which is exactly what it is supposed to be. Ladies' maids don't wear uniforms the way housemaids do, but Mrs. Hartley Fenn has specific expectations about the appearance of her personal attendant, and those expectations involve a colour palette limited to grey, dark blue and black, with crisply pressed white collar and cuffs that must be replaced every morning, and hair dressed tightly back, every pin in place, no suggestion of anything as unseemly as disorder. You do your hair in the small mirror propped on the window ledge. The mirror is cracked across one corner, a hairline fracture that splits your reflection slightly if you look at it straight on. Your face looks back at you. The dark circles under your eyes deeper than usual because the cramping woke you twice in the night before settling into the dull throb of early morning. Your complexion is slightly grey. You're not, by the general assessment of the household, a remarkable-looking woman, though Mrs. Hartley Fenn once said you had a sensible face, which you have chosen to interpret as a compliment. Every pin in, every strand flat, every button fastened. Agnes Whitmore, presented for duty. You pick up the tin box, replace the board, and go downstairs to begin the day. The servants' stairs are narrow and uncarpeted, dark wood that creaks under your shoes if you're not careful where you put your feet. You've learned the pattern of creaks, the way you've learned everything in this house, through repetition, and the understanding that inattention has consequences. The second step from the bottom, the sixth step on the second landing. You avoid them automatically, your feet finding the safe places without your brain needing to direct them. The kitchen smells of coal and bacon grease, and the warm yeasty smell of bread proving near the range. Bridget is at the sink, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing something that was clearly singed in an enthusiastic way. Mrs. Pierce, the cook, is at the range itself, thick-armed and red-faced, and in the particular mood she occupies every morning before 7, which is not precisely a bad mood, but is definitely a mood that does not welcome conversation. You take your tea standing, the way you always do in the mornings, cup balanced on the corner of the scrub table, and you eat one slice of bread and dripping because your stomach is performing complicated negotiations with the idea of food this morning, and this seems like a reasonable opening position. The cramps have settled to a steady background presence, not worse, not better, just there. Bridget gives you a look over her shoulder from the sink. Not a friendly look, not an unfriendly look, just a look that communicates, across the language of women who have been in service long enough to read faces like books, that she knows. You don't know how she knows. You have given nothing away. But Bridget has been in service for 8 years, and she is 26 years old, and she knows the way women know these things, the same way you would know, looking at her face if the situation were reversed. She turns back to the sink without saying anything. That's all there is to it. That small piece of silent recognition, that mutual understanding that requires no words and receives none, because words are dangerous in a household like this. Words leave traces. Words can be overheard. Words can be reported to Mrs. Hartley Fenn by the housemaid who has ambitions above her current station and considers any piece of domestic intelligence a potential currency. You finish your bread. You finish your tea. You go upstairs to attend to your mistress. Mrs. Caroline Hartley Fenn is 41 years old and has been a widow for 6 years. Her husband, Arthur Hartley Fenn, died of pneumonia in the winter of 1876, leaving her the Pelham Crescent house, a reasonable income from various investments that his solicitor manages, and the particular social position of a woman who is respectable, financially independent, moderately well connected, and not quite certain what to do with any of it. She's not an unkind woman. She is, in many ways, a considerably kinder employer than the alternatives you have encountered in your years of service. She does not shout. She does not throw things. She does not make a practice of finding fault in order to withhold wages, which is more common than anyone likes to admit. She reads a great deal, has opinions about politics that she's learned to keep mostly to herself in mixed company, and subscribes to 3 periodicals that arrive on Tuesdays and Fridays, and which she reads in her boudoir with a seriousness that her acquaintances find slightly eccentric. But she also believes, completely and without question, that a woman's body during certain days of the month is a kind of biological emergency that requires management, rest, and above all discretion. She would no more acknowledge openly that she menstruates than she would announce at a dinner party that she uses a chamber pot. The body's less presentable functions are private. They are not spoken of. They are managed behind closed doors with the minimum necessary equipment and the maximum possible silence. Her bedroom is on the first floor, at the front of the house, with windows that overlook the crescent and the small ornamental garden at its centre. You tap twice on the door before entering, which is the custom, and wait for the soft acknowledgement from within before you turn the handle. The room smells of lavender sachets and the faint coal smoke from the fireplace that you laid yesterday evening, and that is now giving off a gentle warmth that makes the room feel, after the cold of the attic, almost Mediterranean. The curtains are still drawn. Mrs. Hartley Fenn is a small shape under considerable layers of bedclothes, and the sound from the bed suggests she is not yet fully conscious. This is the work. Not the dramatic stuff of novels, not the dressing of women in extraordinary gowns for extraordinary occasions, not the intricate hairdressing of society hostesses preparing for balls. This is the daily work, the constant work, the invisible work that happens in the space between the sleeping body and the presented self. You move to the curtains first, drawing them back with the carefully calculated degree of gradualness that allows the room to fill with grey November daylight without the shock of it waking your mistress unpleasantly. Then the fire, which needs coal and tending. Then the water for washing, poured from the can you collected from the heated can rack on the landing outside, where it has been warming since before you came down this morning. Hot water for Mrs. Hartley Fenn, always hot. That is non-negotiable. The hot water goes into the porcelain basin on the washstand, and you test the temperature with the inside of your wrist before you would ever present it. Because if the water is too hot or too cool, It will be your failing, even though you are not personally responsible for heating it. The water is warm. Good. Your lower back sends you a reminder that it is still there, still present, still maintaining its steady commentary on the morning's proceedings. You straighten from the washstand and press one hand against the small of your back for a moment, just a moment, before you drop it and go to attend to the bed curtains and the warming of your mistress's slippers. Mrs. Hartley Fenn emerges from her bedclothes with the particular slow deliberateness of a woman who has decided to be conscious but has not yet committed to enjoying it. Her hair, which is dark brown and would be quite striking if she ever let it down, is in the long plait you braided for her last night, and there are small creases on one cheek from the pillow. Agnes. Good morning, ma'am. What's the weather? Foggy, ma'am. Cold. I believe it may clear by afternoon. She makes a sound that could mean anything, and reaches for the glass of water on her bedside table. You help her sit up, adjusting the pillows behind her, and she settles back against them with the comfortable authority of a woman who has spent decades being attended to and has made her peace with it. My schedule today, she says. It's not a question exactly. Mrs. Whitmore Lee has called for you at 11, ma'am. You have a fitting at Pearson's at 2. And I believe you mentioned the evening lecture at the Royal Institution. Yes, she interrupts gently. Yes, the lecture, Dr. Anstey. A pause. What does Dr. Anstey lecture on this evening? On the subject of the female nervous constitution, ma'am, its particular vulnerabilities and their management. Mrs. Hartley Fenn looks at the window, at the grey November fog, at nothing in particular. How entirely appropriate, she says, in a tone you have learned means she is thinking something she does not intend to say aloud. She then turns her attention to the business of being dressed, and you turn your attention to the business of dressing her, and neither of you says anything else about Dr. Anstey's lecture, or the female nervous constitution, or anything connected to it, but you think about it. You think about it while you're detangling and dressing her hair, your fingers working through the dark strands with the particular care of someone handling something valuable on behalf of someone else. Your back aches. Your cramping has returned to its steady rhythm. You think about the female nervous constitution and its particular vulnerabilities, and what Dr. Anstey, who charges 5 shillings for a consultation and has a practice in Harley Street that Mrs. Hartley Fenn visits twice yearly, actually knows about what is happening in your body right now. You are fairly sure Dr. Anstey has never once experienced what you are currently experiencing. You are also fairly sure that this has not prevented him from having extensive opinions about it. The thing about 1882, the thing that you exist within so completely that you don't always see it, is that medicine and ignorance have decided to live together in the same house, and have mostly stopped noticing the contradiction. There are men on Harley Street who have read all of Darwin, who believe in germ theory, who have been following the work of Pasteur and Lister, and can discuss the mechanics of antisepsis with genuine intelligence. And these exact same men also believe that a woman who is menstruating should not eat cold food, exercise vigorously, touch food that is being pickled or cured, as the emanations of her body will cause it to spoil, read demanding texts, engage in intellectual work of any kind, wash with cold water, wash with very hot water, dance, ride, experience strong emotion, and above all, above everything, she must not get cold. She must not allow the flow to be interrupted, because the blood, when it cannot exit the body properly, will find somewhere else to go. It will inflame the ovaries. It will ascend to the brain. It will cause what the medical literature of the period describes with remarkable confidence as mental disturbance, hysteria, melancholia, neurasthenia, and in the more dramatic case studies, violent mania. These beliefs are not fringe theories held by eccentric village healers. These beliefs are published in respected medical journals. They are endorsed by the British Medical Association. They are the considered opinion of men who have gone to Oxford and Edinburgh and have framed certificates on their consulting room walls, and they filter down from those consulting rooms through the drawing rooms of women like Mrs. Hartley Fenn, through the downstairs conversations of women like you, into every household in England, into every attic room, into every tin box under every loose board, into every decision about what is safe, what is dangerous, and what can never be named aloud. Your fingers move through Mrs. Hartley Fenn's hair, dividing and pinning with the efficiency of long practice, and you are thinking about cold water and blood and the inside of your own body, and whether any of it is actually true, and whether it matters that you don't quite know. You have never tested it. You have never actually sat in cold water during your time of the month to find out what would happen. You have never had the luxury of conducting the experiment, even if you were inclined to. You have work to do. You have a household that functions because you function. You cannot afford to conduct experiments, so you follow the rules. Mrs. Hartley Fenn is dressed by 8. The hair is up, every pin in place. The top knot dressed with the dark ribbon that suits morning and will be changed for the afternoon calls. Her collar is fastened, her brooch pinned, her morning tea brought up by the under-housemaid and poured by you into the good china cup, which you must handle as if it weighs nothing, even though your hands are slightly less certain this morning than they normally are, the cramps communicating themselves to your fingers in the form of a faint trembling that you suppress by curling your hand carefully around the handle. You pour without spilling anything. Small victory. Agnes. Mrs. Hartley Fenn sets her cup down. I notice you seem rather pale this morning. A pause, brief, measured. I'm quite well, thank you, ma'am. She looks at you. She's not a fool. She's employed women for 20 years. She knows the language of I'm quite well, thank you, and the person saying it is visibly pale and moving with the slightly careful quality of someone managing something. But she also knows the language of discretion. She's been managing the same thing herself for 27 years, with the same silence, the same invisibility, the same presentation of a body that appears to be perfectly functional and uncomplicated. Very well, she says. Make sure you get something warm with your midday meal. Yes, ma'am. And that is the entirety of the conversation. That is the whole of the accommodation. A suggestion to eat something warm, which is not nothing actually, which is, in the context of what most women in your position receive, which is nothing at all, a small and genuine kindness. You carry it with you for the rest of the morning like a coin in your pocket. By 9 o'clock you are in the dressing room adjacent to Mrs. Hartley Fenn's bedroom, laying out the clothes for the afternoon calls and the appointment at Pearson's. This involves the careful assessment of 2-day dresses, their comparative merits as appropriate to both a morning call to Mrs. Whitmore Lee, who is informal and warm and won't care much what Mrs. Hartley Fenn is wearing, and an afternoon fitting at a dressmaker's establishment, where everything she wears will be assessed and commented upon. You decide on the dark blue wool for the morning and the grey silk for the afternoon, and you begin the work of checking the grey silk for any marks or loose threads or missing buttons. Because if there is a missing button on Mrs. Hartley Fenn's dress when she arrives at Pearson's, there will be no suggestion that this reflects poorly on the dressmaker, or the silk, or the weather, or the alignment of the planets. There will simply be a look, and a note, and possibly a docking. You find no missing buttons. The work takes most of your attention, but not all of it. Part of your attention is always monitoring the lower half of your body, with the quiet anxiety of someone keeping an eye on a situation that could at any moment become a problem. You have been doing this for 9 years, since the first time at 13, when you bled through your dress in the school that the village ran 3 days a week in the church hall, and had to walk home across the village green with your coat held behind you in both hands, praying that nobody was looking out their windows. You got very good very quickly at the monitoring, at the anticipating, at the management of a body that required constant discreet attention. The arrangement under your working clothes is holding. You checked it when you used the servants' privy on the ground floor, which required walking through the kitchen and down a step and through a door that sticks, and the whole operation was managed with the particular efficiency of someone who has had years of practice making necessary bodily functions invisible. The rag needs changing, probably by midday. You have a fresh one folded in your apron pocket, wrapped in a scrap of brown paper so it looks like nothing at all. This is logistics. This is the constant, invisible, logistical management of being a woman in a body that behaves like this in a world that requires you to behave as if it doesn't. 9:30. The under-housemaid, whose name is Jenny and who is 16, and has the wide-eyed quality of someone who's recently moved from somewhere considerably quieter than London, appears at the dressing-room door to say that a delivery has arrived from the drapers in South Audley Street and needs to be signed for. You go. You come back. The grey silk still has no missing buttons. At 10, Mrs. Hartley Fenn asks you to write a reply to a letter she received yesterday from a cousin in Wiltshire, because her cousin writes in an extremely small hand that gives Mrs. Hartley Fenn a headache, and she dictates while you write, sitting at the small writing desk in the boudoir with the pen and the good notepaper, your own hand steady enough for the work if you hold the pen firmly. The letter is about nothing very important. The cousin's children, a garden, the inconvenience of the railways. You write it out in your clearest hand and blot it carefully and fold it and put it in the envelope. 11 o'clock. Mrs. Whitmore-Lee arrives. You help Mrs. Hartley Fenn into the dark blue wool, check that the hair is still perfectly in place, stand back to examine the total picture with the critical eye that your employer pays you to have, and then glide out of the room to let the visit proceed. Mrs. Whitmore-Lee is a comfortable woman of about 50 who smells of face powder and something warm and slightly vanilla, and whose visits always involve a great deal of comfortable laughter from behind the drawing-room door that carries quite clearly to the landing. You like Mrs. Whitmore-Lee in the abstract way that you allow yourself to have opinions about your employer's acquaintances, which is to say, quietly, without any particular expression, and mostly as a background note in the composition of the working day. You take the opportunity of the visit to do something that requires concentration and a degree of privacy. You go back to your attic room and change the rag. This is, in the vocabulary of domestic management that no etiquette book will ever print, an errand. You are on an errand. The errand takes approximately 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, you climb the servants' stairs to the attic, remove the used rag with the careful efficiency of someone conducting an operation that must leave no trace, wrap it in the brown paper you brought with you, set it aside in the tin box, pin the fresh rag in place, adjust the belt, check the arrangement, and then check it again. The used rag goes back in the tin box. This is the part that people who have never experienced this particular reality of life fail to understand. The management does not end with the initial management. It continues constantly in the form of the question of what to do with the evidence. You will wash the rags tonight, after everyone is in bed, after the house is quiet, in the small sink in the corner of the laundry room in the basement, with cold water, because the hot water that comes from the copper requires stoking a fire and making noise and drawing the kind of attention that would require explanations you are not equipped to give. Cold water and whatever soap is available, and your own hands working quickly in the dark, and then the rags will be wrung out and folded small and hidden somewhere to dry, somewhere that is not going to be found by Jenny the under housemaid when she comes down to start the laundry at 6 tomorrow morning. This is, in its own way, a kind of craft, the craft of invisibility, the craft of leaving no evidence of a process that is, despite all the prohibitions against acknowledging it, entirely normal and continuous and monthly, and has been happening in this city, in this country, in this world, for as long as there have been women in it. You replace the loose board, you go back downstairs. Mrs. Whitmore Lee is still laughing about something in the drawing room. You stand in the corridor for a moment, your hand flat against the wall, just breathing. The ache in your back has intensified slightly in the climb up and down the stairs, and the cramps are doing something more complex now, something rhythmic and mean that you recognize as the first day settling in properly. This will be the worst of it. Tomorrow will be slightly easier. The day after, easier still. By the fourth day, it will be almost manageable. But today is today. You breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, 3 times, which is not a practice you learned anywhere, just something you arrived at through years of standing in various corridors, trying not to let your face show what your body is doing. Then you go to answer the question Jenny is hovering at the end of the corridor with, which is whether you know where Mrs. Hartley Fenn keeps the spare candlesticks. You do know. You know where everything is. Knowing where everything is most of the job. London in November 1882 is a city that operates on several simultaneous planes of reality, and understanding this is important to understanding why you're now stepping out of the front door of number 14 Pelham Crescent into the particular quality of cold, damp, slightly sulphurous air that passes for atmosphere in South Kensington at midday. You are running an errand for Mrs. Hartley Fenn, a specific errand, a small package to be delivered to a woman in Onslow Square who is Mrs. Hartley Fenn's closest friend, and who has loaned her a book that needs to be returned, along with a note that you have already put in the envelope, and which you are fairly sure contains the kind of personal observations that Mrs. Hartley Fenn would not commit to a letter she expected anyone other than the recipient to read. But you are also, and this is the thing that gives the midday errands their particular texture, briefly and entirely alone in a city of 4 million people, which is the closest thing to privacy that your life currently contains. The air is cold enough to see your breath. The fog hasn't cleared, as you predicted to Mrs. Hartley Fenn this morning, but it has thinned slightly, the way London fog sometimes does by midday, pulling back from its densest ambitions into something merely grey and present rather than genuinely obscuring. The Crescent is quiet at this hour, the servants of the neighbouring households mostly engaged in their indoor duties, the residents either inside or in their carriages doing the things residents do, which from your perspective mostly involves being conveyed from one interior to another while someone else manages the weather. You walk at the steady, purposeful pace of a woman with somewhere specific to be, which is also the pace of a woman who is managing lower back pain while carrying a parcel and trying to look like she is doing neither. Pelham Crescent to Onslow Square is not a long walk. 8 minutes, perhaps 10 in this cold, and with this particular quality of aching. The streets of South Kensington in 1882 are, by London standards, quite respectable. Wide enough for carriages to pass in both directions. Paved rather than merely cobbled. The front areas of the houses clean and swept. The railings painted, the steps whitened. This is not the London of the rookeries and the doss houses and the gin shops. This is the London that has decided to present itself well, and has the money to make the effort convincing. But even here, even in the respectable streets of Kensington, the city asserts itself. A costermonger is setting up his barrow on the corner, his voice carrying the particular carrying quality of someone who has been shouting for a living for 20 years. The sound of horses' hooves on stone, steady and rhythmic, overlaid with the rattle of carriage wheels. Somewhere nearby, someone is burning something that has decided to smell particularly acrid today, the way coal fires do when the wind is from a certain direction. The fog amplifies all of it, giving the sounds a muffled, close quality, as if the city is being performed just slightly too near to you. You pass a woman pushing a perambulator. She is young, perhaps your age, with the face of someone who is very tired and has made her peace with it. The baby inside the perambulator is bundled so comprehensively against the cold that only its face is visible. A small pink determined face with the expression all babies have, which is the expression of someone who is deeply committed to an agenda that nobody else fully understands. You walk past, she walks past. Two young women in South Kensington on a November morning, each managing their particular arrangement of requirements, and the baby makes a sound like a small dignified complaint about the fog. The Onslow Square errand is completed in 3 minutes. The housekeeper at the door takes the package and the note, with the brisk authority of a woman who has received approximately 10,000 packages at approximately 10,000 doors, and is not expecting this one to be particularly remarkable. She's right. It isn't. But on the way back you take the slightly longer route, not so long that it would be noticed, just a block or two out of your way, down a street that passes the chemist's shop you've been meaning to stop at for the past 2 days. The chemist's name is Croft and Son, and the shop occupies the ground floor of a building on Brompton Road with a window display of patent medicines and the kind of mysterious bottled preparations that speak to an era when medicine and commerce and optimism have joined forces in an almost touching way. In the window, Dr. Williams's pink pills for pale people, Ayer's cherry pectoral, a display of what appears to be an electromagnetic belt that promises to address a range of complaints, including rheumatism, lumbago, and nervous exhaustion. A prominently positioned bottle of something called Woman's Friend that you know, because Mrs. Pierce mentioned it to Bridget last month in the kitchen when she thought you weren't listening, is a preparation sold specifically for what is occurring in your body right now. You push open the door. The bell above it rings once, a bright metal sound, and you're inside a room that smells of medicinal spirits and dried herbs and something sweetly chemical underneath. The shelves are lined with brown glass bottles, ceramic jars, pasteboard boxes. Behind the counter, a young man with spectacles and the complexion of someone who spends most of their time indoors is writing something in a ledger. He looks up. "Good afternoon, miss. What can I help you with?" And here is the moment. The moment that every woman who has ever stood at a chemist's counter at this particular time of month knows. The moment where you have to decide how much to say and how to say it, and how to arrange your face during the saying of it, so that the transaction is completed with the minimum possible amount of acknowledged embarrassment on either side. You have specific requirements. You need, in order of urgency, something for the pain. The cramping. Not that you would describe it as cramping. You would describe it as, and you have practiced this, a particular discomfort of a monthly nature that you would like to manage with the least disruption to your daily duties. And if possible, something for the smell. This is the one you least want to ask for. This is the one that requires the most carefully constructed approach. I am looking for something, you say, and your voice comes out perfectly steady. For a monthly complaint. Something to ease discomfort. And I wonder if you have anything in the nature of a toilet preparation, a deodorant of some kind, for use about the person. The young man with the spectacles doesn't blink. He has heard considerably worse, you suspect, from considerably less composed women. He puts his pen down and turns to the shelf behind him with the practised air of someone who has been trained to process this type of request without commentary. For the discomfort, he says, his voice professionally neutral, we have Beecham's pills, which many ladies find helpful. Or there is Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, though that is more typically for inflammation. And there is Dr. Thompson's preparation specifically for female monthly complaints, which comes highly recommended. He sets 3 brown bottles on the counter in a neat row. You look at them. Dr. Thompson's preparation for female monthly complaints contains, as you will discover if you read the small print on the label, principally pennyroyal, which is a herb that is believed in this period to encourage menstrual flow, along with iron, which is believed to strengthen the blood, and a small amount of laudanum, which is believed to make the other problems temporarily less important. This is 1882 medicine. The laudanum is not considered problematic. The laudanum is considered the sensible therapeutic component. And for the other matter, the young man continues, turning to a different section of the shelving. We have chloride of lime, which is perhaps the most reliable preparation, and there is also a new supply of this, which has come from Mr. Yobst's establishment. He places a small blue cardboard box on the counter. The box says in neat printed letters, absorbent cotton wool for hygienic use. And underneath, in smaller letters, recommended by the medical profession for the management of monthly indisposition. You look at the box. What's in the box is essentially cotton wadding, commercial absorbent cotton, sold by the half-pound for medical dressings and bandaging, and the packing of wounds, now being sold tentatively and with maximum discretion, in small boxes in select chemist shops to women who are tired of laundering flannel rags. This is not yet the refined commercial sanitary product of the next decade. That product, something that will eventually be sold as Lister's towels, is coming, but not quite yet, not for another few years, and even then it will cost enough that a lady's maid earning £12 a year will think carefully before making it a regular expenditure. Right now, in November 1882, there is this, a box of cotton wool, and the faintest suggestion that perhaps the problem of monthly management might eventually be addressed by something other than the flannel rag system women have been using since textiles existed. You buy the Dr. Thompson's preparation. You buy the chloride of lime in its brown paper packet. You do not buy the cotton wool, because 6p for a half-pound box is more than you want to spend this week, and because the flannel rags are already at home in the tin box, washed and folded, doing the job they do. But you look at the box for a moment longer than necessary, and the young man behind the counter notices but says nothing. 2 and 9p, he says. You pay. He wraps the purchases in brown paper. You put the parcel in your basket alongside the spot where the returned book used to be, and you push the door open, and the bell rings once more, and you are back in the cold. 2 shillings and 9p. That is nearly a quarter of a week's wages for the luxury of not suffering quite as much and not smelling quite as worrying. You think about this for a moment as you walk back toward Pelham Crescent, the cold wind pushing at your skirts from the southwest, the cramps reminding you of their continued presence. Then you stop thinking about it, because thinking about the economics of physical inconvenience will not make any of the numbers better, and you have approximately 15 minutes before you need to be back at the house to begin preparations for Mrs. Hartley Fenn's afternoon. The thing that nobody who has not lived this particular reality understands, and the thing that is important to understand before we go any further, is that what you are managing is not just a physical process, it is a social one, a permanent ongoing negotiation between what your body is doing and what the world requires your body to appear to be doing. In 1882, a woman's menstrual cycle is simultaneously a medical fact, acknowledged by doctors with elaborate and largely incorrect theories, a religious fact rooted in Levitical law, which states that a woman is ritually unclean for 7 days, and that anything she touches, any surface she sits or lies on, becomes unclean also, and that any man who touches her during this time becomes unclean. A domestic fact, managed by women in private with whatever means are available to them. A social non-fact. A thing that does not exist in polite conversation. A thing that is never named. A thing that is referred to, if it must be referred to at all, in language so indirect that a foreigner overhearing the conversation would have absolutely no idea what was being discussed. Monthly indisposition, an unwell time, the general complaint, the curse in whispers, among women who know each other well enough for whispers. All of these realities exist simultaneously, in the same body, in the same house, on the same November morning. And what they add up to is this: a young woman who is managing a normal biological process with the logistics of a military operation and the silence of a conspiracy. You are back at number 14. Mrs. Hartley Fenn is already in the hall, drawing on her gloves, because Mrs. Hartley Fenn is constitutionally incapable of being the person that someone else is waiting for, and considers unpunctuality a moral failing of the first order. You help her into her coat, which is dark green wool with a collar of darker velvet, and you check the hat pin in her hat, and pick an infinitesimal thread from the shoulder of the coat that wasn't there 5 minutes ago but is there now, the way threads appear on coats with the inexplicable creativity of the inanimate world, and you pass her the small velvet bag that serves as her afternoon purse. She looks at you. You took rather longer than expected on the errand. I apologize, ma'am. There was small additional stop required. She holds your gaze for a moment with the expression of a woman who has long practice in receiving information that is technically true and substantially incomplete. Then she nods. Very well. I shall be at Pearson's until approximately 4. Then I will call on the Marchmont bells. I expect to return by 6. Yes, ma'am. I'll have your evening things ready. She goes. The door closes behind her. The hall is quiet, briefly, with the particular quality of quiet that exists in a house when the person whose requirements organize all the other requirements has left. You stand in it for a moment. Then you go downstairs to eat something with your midday meal, because Mrs. Hartley Fenn told you to, and because you are in fact hungry, and because the Dr. Thompson's preparation, which you will take with water when you get to the kitchen, will be more effective on a full stomach, which is what it says on the paper wrapped around the bottle. The kitchen at midday smells of the remains of this morning's breakfast, and the beginnings of tonight's dinner. a complicated layering of smells that resolves into the smell of braised beef and turnips, which is what Mrs. Pierce is making for the family table this evening, and bread and cold mutton for the servants, which is what you are having. Bridget is at the table already, eating with the focused attention of someone who was in this kitchen before 6 this morning and has not sat down since. She has a wedge of bread in one hand and a cup of tea in the other, and she's staring at the middle distance with the expression of someone whose middle distance is currently occupied by nothing but the blessed absence of the thing they were doing before. Jenny appears at the door, hovers briefly, is told by Mrs. Pierce to sit down and eat before she falls down, and sits with the relieved air of someone who's been given permission for something they needed but couldn't request. You sit at the far end of the table across from Bridget and pour yourself tea from the large brown pot, and cut yourself a piece of bread and a slice of the cold mutton, and you eat in the companionable silence of people who have been working together long enough that silence is not uncomfortable. It is simply the baseline condition of the profession. It's Bridget who speaks first. She's looking at the table rather than at you, and her voice is pitched at exactly the level that carries between the two of you without carrying further, which is a skill that develops rapidly in service. "How are you keeping?" You meet her eyes briefly over the table. "Well enough." "I've got some valerian if you want it. Mrs. Pierce lets me keep it in the spice cupboard. It helps with the cramping." You look at her. Bridget is not a woman who says things unless they need saying. She's been in service since she was 14, and she has the particular economy of communication that develops in people who live and work in close proximity to others and have learned that words have social weight. She is not offering this out of sentimentality. She's offering it because she has been in the position you're in, probably more times than she can count, and because the offer of valerian is a reasonable practical thing that costs her almost nothing and might help you get through the afternoon. "Thank you," you say. She brings the little twist of paper from the spice cupboard, and you open it and smell the slightly dusty, faintly bitter smell of dried valerian root, and you add a pinch of it to your tea and drink it. And it is not a miracle, and it does not stop anything, but it takes a certain edge off the cramps by early afternoon, and that is not nothing. This is the underground economy of women's knowledge, not the official knowledge, not the medical knowledge of the Harley Street physicians and their lectures at the Royal Institution about the female nervous constitution and its management. The other knowledge, the knowledge of what actually helps, passed between women in kitchens and attic rooms and laundry rooms, accumulated over generations of managing a body that the official world is simultaneously obsessed with and refuses to properly attend to. Valerian for cramps, raspberry leaf tea later in life, a hot brick wrapped in flannel pressed to the lower back, if you have access to a brick and a fire. The particular combination of a tightly laced corset actually helping with cramps, rather than making them worse, which seems wrong but is sometimes true. The exact amount of laudanum that will take the edge off without making you unfit for work, which is a calculation that many women are making in this period, with the casual expertise of people who have been doing arithmetic their whole lives. Mrs. Pierce says nothing about the valerian. She is stirring the braised beef with the expression of a woman who has seen everything and categorized it and moved on. You finish your lunch. You take the Dr. Thompson's preparation with the last of your tea, reading the label one more time, the same way you always read labels on preparations you've taken before, looking for the instruction you might have missed. The label says to take 1 pill with water or warm tea 3 times daily during the time of monthly indisposition, and to rest when possible, and to avoid cold, damp environments. Avoid cold, damp environments. You look out the kitchen window. The November fog is still doing its particular thing to the grey London air. The kitchen is one of the warmer rooms in the house, by virtue of the range, but warm is a relative term in a basement in Kensington in November. You're wearing everything you own on your body, more or less, and your feet in your boots are still slightly cold from the morning errand. You're going to be entirely unable to avoid cold, damp environments for the duration of this working day. You take the pill anyway. The afternoon passes with the slightly underwater quality that the first day of a period gives to everything, where you're doing exactly what you're meant to be doing, but a portion of your attention is always occupied by the monitoring, the checking, the calculation of when you'll next need to change the arrangement, whether you're bleeding more heavily than you thought, whether that brief sharp cramp was anything to be concerned about, or just the body doing its usual business. You lay out Mrs. Hartley Fenn's evening things, the grey-blue silk with the jet buttons that she wears to lectures at the Royal Institution, because she believes in dressing for intellectual occasions with the same care she would dress for social ones, which is a position you privately respect. The matching wrap, the jet earrings and the narrow jet bracelet, the gloves. You check each item with the systematic attention to detail that your work requires. Buttons all present, no marks on the silk, gloves clean and undarned and fitting properly. While you work, you think about Dr. Anstey and his lecture this evening, about the female nervous constitution and its particular vulnerabilities, about the men who have written the books and given the lectures and published in the journals, who have decided with complete confidence that what is happening in your body right now is a kind of fragility, a weakness, a thing that must be managed because left unmanaged it will produce chaos emotionally, physically, intellectually. That women during their menstruating years are inherently less stable, less reliable, less suited for the demands of vigorous intellectual or physical engagement, because their bodies are doing something that requires all available resources and leaves little for anything else. And you think about what the alternative looks like right now in this room, in your body. You are doing the work. You have done the work all day, from 5:45 this morning when you got up in the cold and dressed and went downstairs, through the morning attendances and the midday errand and the small piece of logistics at the chemist's and the afternoon preparations, and you will continue doing the work through the evening and the return of your mistress and the undressing and the dressing for the next day, and the final checks of the house and the washing of the rags in the basement sink at 10 o'clock tonight. The female nervous constitution is not having a rest cure. The female nervous constitution is ironing the collar for tomorrow's dress with a flat iron that needs to be reheated every 3 minutes, which requires going back and forth to the range on the landing, and which you're doing with entirely steady hands. Because if the collar is wrinkled, it is your problem, and your problem cannot express itself in wrinkled collars. This is the gap. The gap between what the official medical world believes about menstruating women and what menstruating women are actually doing every day in houses and factories and fields and shops all across the country, all across the world. The official world believes you should be resting. You are ironing. The official world believes the cold water is dangerous. You are calculating when you will next have access to cold water to wash the rags. The official world believes your mental faculties are compromised. You have managed 3 separate tasks simultaneously, and lost no invoice and given no incorrect information, and poured no cup of tea incorrectly, and you will continue to do so until the work is done. But the official world writes the books, and the books are what the doctors read, and the doctors are what the women with money consult when their bodies do something alarming. And then the information comes back, filtered through those consultations, through the drawing room conversations, through the kitchen whispers, and becomes the landscape of what is safe and what is dangerous and what is not to be done. Do not wash. Do not exercise. Do not work your mind. Do not let the cold stop the flow. And so the women who can afford not to work don't. They rest. They take to their beds, or their chaise longues, or their private sitting rooms. They take their laudanum, or their iron pills, or their proprietary female preparations, and they wait it out. 5 days, 7 days, whatever their particular arrangement requires, and they come out the other side pale and slightly confused and told by their doctors that this is entirely natural and entirely how it's supposed to be. And the women who cannot afford not to work continue working. They work through the whole thing, start to finish, without rest cures and without chaise longues. And the remarkable thing, the thing that the official medical literature of 1882 never seems to notice or find puzzling, is that none of them appear to go mad. None of them appear to suffer the brain inflammation or the uterine ascent or the violent mania that the cold water is supposed to cause. They just work. And wash in cold water anyway, because there is no choice. Mrs. Hartley Fenn returns at 6:30, just slightly later than she said, which you anticipated and which is why the grey-blue silk is ready. But you have not yet started heating the water for her wash, because heated water at 6 and heated water at 6:30 are different temperatures, and Mrs. Hartley Fenn has opinions about water temperature. She comes in smelling of cold air and other people's drawing rooms and the faintest trace of something warm and floral that you identify as the lavender water used in the Marchmont Bell House, because you know the lavender water used in the Marchmont Bell House, because you have been in the business of knowing what things smell like for 3 years. She is in good spirits, which you can tell from the way she comes through the door and the way she hands you her coat. Mrs. Hartley Fenn's good spirits are not expansive or particularly visible to anyone who doesn't know her. They manifest as a slight loosening of the set of her shoulders and a tendency to ask questions rather than make statements. Was there anything while I was out? A note from Lady Harcourt, ma'am. It's on the salver, and a delivery from the stationer's. Good, good. A pause. Pearson's has the new silk in. Green. A particular shade of green. She says this the way she says things she has decided she wants, with the quiet certainty of a woman who has reached the age of 41 and has stopped pretending she doesn't want things. Very good, ma'am. I'll make a note. You carry her coat to the wardrobe. You prepare her for the evening. The grey-blue silk, the jet, the hair dressed slightly differently for a lecture than for an afternoon call, the wrap, the gloves. The lecture at the Royal Institution begins at 8. She will take a cab. At 7:45 she is ready, and she looks exactly as she should, and you have done the work of making her look that way, with the professional invisibility that you've been trained to. And she pauses at the door of her room and turns to look at you in the particular way that means she's about to say something. Agnes. Ma'am, take the evening, rest if you need it. A pause, not looking at you quite directly. I shall not need you until morning. She goes. You stand in the empty bedroom for a moment, in the smell of lavender and jet and the particular quality of absence left by a well-dressed woman, and you think about what she has just done. She knows. She has always known. She cannot say it. She will not say it. The rules of the household, the rules of the social order they both inhabit, Do not permit the explicit acknowledgement of what you are managing. But she knows, and she is offering you, within the constraints of what she can offer, what she can actually give you, an evening, time, the thing that costs nothing to give and that you could not have asked for. You sit on the edge of the chaise longue that you're absolutely not supposed to sit on, being as it is a piece of furniture reserved for Mrs. Hartley Fenn's personal use, and you let out a breath that you've been holding in various different ways since approximately 5:45 this morning. The room is warm, the fire is going well, the silk curtains at the windows block the fog and the cold, and there is a lamp lit on the side table that gives the room a warm amber quality that has very little to do with November and everything to do with the human desire to create warmth when the world is refusing to provide it. Your back aches, your feet ache. The cramps have settled into the particular kind of background presence that means they're not getting worse, but they're also not going anywhere. You allow yourself approximately 5 minutes on the chaise longue. Then you get up because there are things to do and they won't do themselves, and you have an evening which is extraordinary, and you intend to use it for its most pressing purpose. The laundry room in the basement is exactly what it sounds like, a room in which laundry happens. It contains a large copper for boiling, a smaller sink for rinsing and hand washing, a mangle that takes 2 people to operate effectively, drying racks that can be raised and lowered on a pulley system, an ironing board, and the smell of steam and lye soap that soaks into the walls of laundry rooms over years until it becomes structural. At 8 o'clock in the evening the room is empty. Mrs. Pierce retired to her room at 7:30. Bridget and Jenny are upstairs in the servants' sitting room, which is also the servants' everything room, and you can hear, very faintly through the ceiling, the sound of Jenny laughing at something Bridget has said. You close the door of the laundry room behind you. The sink is in the corner, stone cold, with a single cold tap that produces water with the particular force of London mains pressure, which is more than adequate for this purpose. You've brought the rags from the tin box in the attic, wrapped in the brown paper, carried down the servants' stairs in your apron pocket. You unwrap them. There are 3, the one you removed this morning, the one you changed at midday, and the one you're currently wearing, which you remove and replace with a fresh one for the night. A practice so familiar now that it takes less than 2 minutes. Then you roll up your sleeves. The water from the tap is cold. November cold, London cold, the kind of cold that makes the skin of your forearms tighten and your hands ache immediately at the knuckles. You run the water over the first rag and the water runs slightly pink at first, then clearer as the soap works through the cotton flannel, and your hands move in the practiced rhythm of someone who's done this specific task in conditions very similar to these many hundreds of times. The soap is plain laundry soap, a bar of it kept in the tin box specifically for this purpose, used down to a sliver. It's hard and slightly rough against your palms, and it smells of tallow and lye, and it does the job it needs to do. You're thinking, as your hands work in the cold water and the lamp on the table gives you just enough light to see what you're doing, about the prohibitions, about the cold water, about what you're supposedly not supposed to be doing right now. You're washing in cold water on the first day, when the flow is heaviest, and the prohibitions against cold water are therefore theoretically most dangerous. Your hands are very cold. Nothing else is happening. There is no inward surge of blood. There is no inflammation ascending toward your brain. There is no sign of the violent mania that should theoretically be developing as a consequence of the temperature of the water interacting with the biological process currently occurring in the lower part of your body. There is just cold water and laundry soap and your hands doing the work they need to do, and the faint sound of laughter from 2 floors above, and the quiet of a basement room at 8 in the evening. You wring the first rag out carefully, pressing the water from the flannel with both hands, and hang it on the lowest part of the drying rack, tucked behind the larger household linens that are already there, invisible unless someone specifically goes looking. You start on the second. The thing about the prohibition against washing in cold water, the thing that becomes apparent when you stand in a laundry room at 8 o'clock at night doing exactly what you're not supposed to do, is not that it was invented maliciously. The people who developed and promoted and transmitted this belief, the physicians and the mothers and the domestic advice manuals, were not in any obvious way trying to make your life more complicated. They were trying, in their own particular way, to manage something that nobody fully understood, through a combination of ancient religious tradition, contemporary medical theory, and the kind of precautionary reasoning that substitutes for evidence when evidence is not available. Levitical law, which provided the framework for thinking about menstruation that much of Victorian England still operated within, even if not explicitly, declared a menstruating woman ritually unclean. Not morally unclean, not sinful, just in a state of ritual impurity that required specific management. She should not be touched. She should not touch certain things. After 7 days she should bathe in clean water, and she would be clean. The 7 days, that's the other thing. The Levitical requirement was for 7 days of uncleanliness, regardless of how long the actual bleeding lasted. If you bled for 3 days, you were still unclean for 7. If you bled for 7 days, your uncleanliness extended beyond that. The religious calendar of menstrual management bore very little relationship to the actual biological variation in menstrual duration, which ranges enormously between women and across a woman's lifetime, and the result was a set of rules that didn't quite fit any particular woman's body, but that everyone was expected to observe anyway. By 1882, the Levitical law is not the explicit framework being used by the Harley Street physicians. They have replaced it with science, or what they are calling science. The new framework says that menstrual blood is not spiritually unclean, it is physiologically unusual. It is a specific type of blood produced by a specific process with specific properties. It is, in some theories, toxic to men. In other theories, it's simply fragile and easily disrupted. In most theories, it is something that should exit the body in its proper quantity and timing, and should not be interfered with by cold or shock or vigorous exercise or any other external influence that might cause it to do something unexpected. This theory is also not medically accurate, but it is the theory, and it produces the rules, and the rules produce what you are living right now, in this house and in every house up and down this country. You finish the 3rd rag, you hang it behind the linens, you straighten, and your back protests the angle you've been holding at the sink, and you press one fist against the small of your back and breathe slowly. The water in the sink has gone slightly pink again. You run the cold tap and let it wash away, watching the water run clear, and then you turn the tap off and dry your hands on the linen cloth you keep in the tin box for this purpose, and you roll your sleeves back down. Clean. Done. The rags will be dry enough by morning if the kitchen range is working properly, which it usually is. Jenny won't notice them behind the household linens, because Jenny doesn't look closely at things unless Mrs. Pierce specifically directs her attention to them, and Mrs. Pearce won't be looking at the linens rack before the rags are removed. This is the calculation. This is always the calculation. You pick up the lamp and go back upstairs. In your attic room, with the thin blanket pulled up and the tin box back under the loose board and the November cold, doing what November cold does to unheated attic rooms, you lie in the dark and think about things. You think about what you know and what you don't know. You think about the distance between what the official world believes about your body and what your body actually does. You think about Bridget's Valerian and Mrs. Hartley Fenn's unspoken acknowledgement, and the young man at the chemist's counter who handled the transaction with professional neutrality, and the cold tap in the laundry room, and your hands that are still slightly numb at the fingertips from the water. You think about the women who rest, the women who take to their chaises-longues for 5 days every month and let the rest cure happen, who have the luxury of treating their bodies as fragile and interesting and requiring of careful management. You do not exactly envy them. Or you do envy them, but only in the abstract way you envy all people who are allowed to be the thing they actually are without having to pretend otherwise. You think about your mother, pressing the folded cloth into your hands at 13 and saying quietly that you were to tell no one what she meant by that, what she was trying to give you in that small instruction, in that compressed piece of inherited knowledge. She didn't mean it unkindly. She meant protect yourself. She meant navigate this. She meant the world requires you to manage this without help and without acknowledgement. And the only way to do that is to become very good at managing it without help or acknowledgement. And the only way to do that is to start practicing right now. She was 13 when her mother told her the same thing, and her mother was 13 when her mother told her, and on and on and on, back through all the generations of women who managed this particular thing in this particular silence, with whatever was available to them, flannel or linen or lamb's wool or whatever came to hand, and got on with the work and told no one. The cramps ease slightly around 10 o'clock. The valerian, or the Dr. Thompson's preparation, or simply the body's own rhythm settling into what they settle into as the first day progresses. You're warm enough finally with the blanket and the fact that the walls of the house are thick enough that the cold takes a while to penetrate. Tomorrow, the second day. Slightly better, slightly more manageable. The monitoring still constant, the management still ongoing, but the acute edge of the first day past. By the third day, you'll be almost yourself again. By the fourth, entirely. And then, in approximately 3 weeks and a few days, depending on how regular you're running this month and how the rest has gone, you'll wake up before dawn in the cold attic room and know again, before you open your eyes, before anything has been confirmed that it's starting again. And you'll get the tin box out from under the loose board, and you'll manage. The church bells from the church on the old Brompton Road ring 11. Then, sometime later, 12. In between, London does what London does at night, which is mostly continue being London, just slightly quieter about it. You fall asleep. The days move with their particular Victorian logic, one after another, each governed by the rituals and requirements of the household and the season, and the particular demands of Mrs. Hartley Fenn's social life, which is not exactly social in the way that implies enjoyment so much as it is social in the way that implies the careful maintenance of a web of obligations and relationships that constitutes a respectable woman's work in this period. It is now 3 weeks since the November morning you woke in the cold attic room, and you have been managing December in the same way you manage everything else, which is with efficiency and silence, and the occasional valerian fortified cup of tea in the kitchen with Bridget, And now it is a Sunday afternoon, which means the household has its breath in a particular way. The compressed suspension of normal operations that Sundays introduce into even the most well-regulated establishments. Mrs. Hartley Fenn is at church. Then she will be at luncheon with the Marchmont Bells. Then she will return, and you will see to her afternoon arrangements. But between the church departure and the afternoon return, there is a window of approximately 3 hours that is, technically, yours. 3 hours. In those 3 hours, you can technically sleep, or read, if you can get hold of something to read, or sit in the servants' sitting room and allow the time to simply pass, which is what Jenny usually does, looking out the window at whatever is happening on the street with the patient curiosity of a young woman from a small town who has not yet stopped finding large cities extraordinary. But today, for reasons you cannot entirely articulate, you want to go outside. You want to be in the open air, even November open air, even London November open air, which is a contradictory combination of cold and coal smoke and damp that most city planners would not have designed intentionally. You want to be somewhere that is not this house, this corridor, this series of rooms that you move through with such practiced efficiency that you sometimes feel like a component of the house rather than a person inside it. You put on your Sunday coat, it's navy wool, better quality than your working clothes, bought from a second-hand stall in Portobello Road the previous spring for 2 shillings and 6pence, and refitted at the armholes to sit properly. You pin your hat. You check the mirror in your room, the cracked one that splits your reflection at one corner, and you look back at yourself, Agnes Whitmore, 22, lady's maid, sensible face. Then you go outside. Hyde Park in December is not exactly at the peak of its appeal. The grass is winter brown and slightly muddy near the paths. The Serpentine is grey and wind-riffled. The trees are bare, their branches making the particular elegant winter architecture of deciduous trees against a pewter sky, which is genuinely beautiful if you're in the mood for it, and merely melancholy if you're not. You're in the mood for it today. You've walked here twice before, both times in the summer when the park had its best self on display. All green and crowded, and the kind of pleasantly democratic space where a lady's maid and a duchess can both walk within 20 feet of each other and nobody needs to acknowledge the arrangement. In summer, the park is full of the particular sounds of leisure. Children, dogs, the distant sound of the bandstand, the conversation of couples walking with the serious purposefulness of people engaged in a project they're calling recreation. In December, it's quieter. The paths are less crowded. The people who are here are mostly people who need to be here, in the specific way that means walking has become a requirement rather than a pleasure. Women with energetic children who've been inside since Thursday. Men with the tight, controlled expression of people trying to walk off something they can't talk about. A nursemaid pushing a perambulator with the resigned competence of someone who is going to be pushing this perambulator through this park every morning, regardless of the weather for the next 18 months, and has adjusted her inner life accordingly. And you. You walk to the Serpentine and then along its edge, following the path that curves around the water, your breath visible in the cold air, your boots making the particular sound of boot heels on a gravel path that is one of the most satisfying sounds a Sunday afternoon produces. The cold is the honest kind, the kind that clears your head without apology, and you let it do its work. From the path beside the water, looking north, you can see across to the trees on the far edge of the park, and beyond them the grey suggestion of the city continuing, the buildings that line the Bayswater Road, and the chimneys that produce the perpetual contribution of coal smoke to the London atmosphere, and beyond that, theoretically, the rest of it, the whole improbable spread of 4 million people arranged across both sides of the Thames. You sit down on a bench, it's cold, the wood damp through your coat, but you sit anyway because the view from the bench is better than the view from the path, and sometimes better is worth damp. The Serpentine is doing the thing that still water does in cold weather, which is reflecting everything above it with a clarity that the surface doesn't usually achieve in summer, when there's warmth and wind and activity. Right now it's almost a perfect mirror, the grey of the sky reproduced in the grey of the water, and a single duck is making its way across from right to left with the air of a creature with a specific destination and no time for contemplation. London from this bench, your city, or not your city exactly, not in any legal or economic sense, but the city you live in, move through, know the streets of, navigate by landmarks and corner shops, and the way the fog lies differently in different parts of the river. The city that has made you who you are in the 3 years since you moved from Surrey, the city that has given you your trade and your employer, and the specific education of living in close proximity to both wealth and its management. You think about what you know. For instance, which way to walk from here to reach the nearest public water closet, a knowledge that is relevant on a daily basis and that required approximately 2 weeks of inquiry and exploration to acquire. This is the kind of information that guidebooks don't contain, and employers don't provide, and that women share with each other through the same quiet, practical network that shares knowledge of valerian and laundry soap, and the exact way to fold a flannel rag so that it lies flat under a working day's worth of petticoats. You know that the cast iron public conveniences that the London County Council has been installing since the late 70s are a genuine improvement on the previous situation, which was essentially nothing. You know that they are not, however, universally available, and that the ones that exist are predominantly in areas where men are expected to need them, and that the female equivalent is rarer, and that this is not an accident. The city's provision of public facilities reflects, with remarkable fidelity, the city's beliefs about who is out in public and whose needs are worth provisioning. Women are supposed to be inside. Women who are outside are supposed to have either concluded their business efficiently and returned inside, or to be wealthy enough to travel between interiors in a private carriage, which removes the need for any intermediate facilities. Women like you are supposed to plan better. You have, over 3 years, become very good at planning. The duck has reached the far edge of the Serpentine and has disappeared somewhere into the reeds. The park is quieter than it was when you arrived, which means either that people have concluded their walking and gone home, or that the cold has persuaded the remaining visitors that perhaps the inside of their houses was, after all, the better option. You're not cold enough to follow them. The bench is damp, but the cold is clear and honest, and it has done what you wanted it to do, which is to exist outside the house for a while and breathe air that doesn't smell of coal fires and lavender water, and the particular close smell of rooms that have been shut against the winter. You think about Mrs. Hartley Fenn at Dr. Anstey's lecture, about the female nervous constitution, about what Dr. Anstey said about it, which you will not hear directly but which you will receive, filtered through Mrs. Hartley Fenn's slightly ironic retelling tomorrow morning, if she is in the mood to recount it. She sometimes is. There is something in the way she talks about these lectures, about the physicians who give them and the theories they promote, that suggests she's not entirely without her own views on the subject, views that she keeps to herself with the practised discretion of a woman who has learned that having views is one thing, and having views that anyone in a position of authority over her body will actually hear is quite another. Dr. Anstey, you know from previous discussions, believes that the uterus and the brain are in competition for the body's resources during a woman's menstruating years. This is a theory that has been around since roughly 1873, when a Harvard physician named Edward Clark published a book called Sex in Education, which argued that educating young women at the same rate and in the same manner as young men was medically dangerous, because it diverted blood flow from the developing uterus to the developing brain, causing permanent damage to the reproductive system. This book was received with widespread enthusiasm by men who already believed that women shouldn't be educated, and with measured frustration by women who'd been managing their brains and their uteruses simultaneously for their entire lives without apparent damage to either. Dr. Anstey's version of the theory is slightly more nuanced than Clark's, in the way that things become slightly more nuanced when the original claim has been challenged often enough that its most embarrassing edges need smoothing. He believes that during the menstrual period specifically, the uterus requires the body's full attention, and that women who continue vigorous intellectual or physical activity during this time are placing themselves at risk of the various nervous conditions that his consulting room is excellently positioned to treat. At 6 shillings per consultation, you're sitting on a bench in Hyde Park in December, thinking about this theory, and you've been doing it for the entire morning, working, thinking, managing, and the only thing visibly wrong with your uterus or your brain is that the cold of the bench is coming through your coat, and you should probably go back. You stay a few minutes more, because there is something about being here, outside, in this particular quality of December air, watching the serpentine do its mirror thing, and the bare trees make their winter patterns, and the occasional walker go past with their purposeful Sunday stride. That feels like a kind of evidence, not dramatic evidence, not the kind you could take to Dr. Anstey's consulting room and present as a refutation of his theories, just the evidence of being here, present, functioning, awake to the cold and the grey beauty of the park and the distant sounds of the city, and your own thoughts moving with the ordinary competence of a person doing what people do, which is thinking. Nothing is driven inward. Nothing is ascending to your brain except thoughts, which are your own. The church bells from somewhere to the east, a sound that London produces constantly and in such variety that you can sometimes identify which church is ringing if the wind is in the right direction, mark 1:15. You've been here nearly an hour. You stand up, brush the damp from the back of your coat, check that your hat is still in place. Then you walk back toward Pelham Crescent, through the gate and along the pavement with the steady, purposeful pace of a woman with somewhere to be, because you do have somewhere to be. You always have somewhere to be, and the city moves around you with its Sunday quality, slightly slower, slightly quieter, still producing the coal smoke and the hoarse sounds and the particular urban density of 4 million people doing Sunday in the way 4 million people do. The street you live on, the house, number 14. You let yourself in through the servants' entrance at the side and go downstairs to the kitchen, where the range is warm and Mrs. Pierce has left soup on the back of it, because Mrs. Pierce has a practical understanding of what Sunday afternoons require that outpaces most formal expressions of care. You eat the soup. It's good soup. Root vegetables and something that might be beef bones, thick enough that the spoon stands up in it. Bridget comes in while you're eating. Her coat still on, her cheeks red from whatever the outside produced during her hour of freedom. "Cold?" she says by way of summary. "Yes, You agree. She sits down, pours herself tea, wraps both hands around the cup. Outside, the December fog is doing something to the light that makes it look later than it is. The kitchen range ticks and sighs with the particular sound of a coal fire doing its work. 2 women in a kitchen, a cup of tea, the afternoon. This is also London. This is also what London contains. The week before Christmas is the Hartley Fen household's most demanding stretch of the year, in the specific way that the weeks before Christmas are demanding for every household that operates at the level of making and receiving calls and attending gatherings and requiring its contents to be presentable in the way that presenting one's household contents publicly demands. This means, in practical terms, 12 calls in 9 days, each requiring Mrs. Hartley Fen to be dressed for calling, which requires you. 2 evening engagements, each requiring an entirely different standard of dress, which requires considerably more of you. A luncheon at number 14 itself, which requires the house to be in a state of presentation that falls slightly outside the daily standard and involves the kind of intensive preparation that starts 4 days before the event and involves everyone from Mrs. Pierce to Jenny. And one afternoon when Mrs. Hartley Fen must, for reasons that are never entirely explained but that are clearly felt deeply, reorganize the contents of her jewellery box from the arrangement it has been in since April into a different but equally logical arrangement that she will look at with satisfaction for approximately 2 weeks before returning it to something very similar to the April arrangement. You understand this impulse. Reorganizing things is how some people process the feeling that other things cannot be reorganized. The December social obligations cannot be moved or avoided or renegotiated. The jewellery box can be. You help with the jewellery box on a Thursday afternoon when there is a gap between a morning call and an evening engagement, and you sit on the floor of Mrs. Hartley Fen's boudoir with the box open between you and the jewellery laid out on the velvet cloth you use for exactly this purpose, and you pass pieces to her and receive them back and arrange and rearrange while she thinks aloud about which pieces should be where and why. And this is, in its way, one of the more relaxed interactions you have with your employer, because it is about objects rather than about the performance of objects, and it requires you in your full capacity rather than just your capacity as an instrument of that performance. This, Mrs. Hartley Fen says, holding up a small garnet brooch, belonged to my mother. She wore it when she was expecting me. The doctor told her not to wear tight jewellery, and she wore this every day until I was born anyway, because she said she would not spend 9 months looking unfinished. You look at the brooch. It's a simple thing. Deep red stones set in gold, designed to be worn at a collar. She sounds very determined, ma'am. She was. She was the most determined person I have ever met. A pause. She turns the brooch in her fingers. She also bled very heavily. Every month. The doctor told her it was because her uterus was unusually sensitive and that she should rest and take iron. She told him she would take the iron and make no promises about the rest. She says this quite calmly, as if she is discussing the weather or the arrangement of the jewellery, as if the topic is entirely ordinary, which, in the context of this conversation, it is. That's the thing. In this room, between these 2 people, in this specific moment, the thing that cannot be named has been named, quietly and in passing, and the world has not ended. Nothing has shifted. The social order is intact. Mrs. Hartley Fen is still 41 years old and a respectable widow, and the employer of a lady's maid and a member of 3 charitable organisations, and a subscriber to the Fortnightly Review. And you are still 22 years old and a lady's maid, and the person who irons her collars and pins her hat and pours her tea, but she has just named the thing. She sounds sensible, you say, carefully, neutrally, not so neutral as to shut the door she's opened, not so expressive as to push through it too hard. She was, a small pause. I was not always. I spent a considerable amount of my 20s following the advice of various physicians, who all agreed that I should rest more than I rested. I was not good at resting. I am still not. She puts the brooch down on the velvet cloth. Dr. Anstey tells me that my tendency to continue working through indisposed periods is the root of my occasional nervous headaches. I see, Ma'am. I believe he's wrong. She says it quite simply, not defiantly, just as a statement of her own considered opinion. I believe my headaches are caused by spending considerable amounts of time in poorly ventilated rooms listening to people talk, and that the correlation with certain days of the month is more likely explained by the fact that I am less able to tolerate the poorly ventilated rooms when I am otherwise uncomfortable. But Dr. Anstey charges 6 shillings per consultation, and graduated from Edinburgh in 1861, and has his certificate on his wall, and I am a widow without a medical degree, so my hypothesis remains unpublished. She picks up the brooch again and places it in the upper compartment of the jewellery box, where it will live until the next reorganisation. There, she says, that's where it should be. You help her put the rest of the jewellery back. The luncheon is on the Saturday before Christmas, and it involves 12 people and 3 courses, and the complete transformation of the dining room into something that communicates effortless domestic grace, while actually being the product of 4 days of Mrs. Pierce's detailed planning and 2 days of everyone else's detailed execution. Your role in the luncheon is primarily Mrs. Hartley Fenn's appearance, and then the management of the kind of small domestic emergencies that 12 people in a house tend to produce. A button that comes loose just before guests arrive, the necessity of locating a second sugar tongs because one has gone missing, the orchestration of Mrs. Hartley Fenn's progress from room to room during the social mechanics of the event. You spend most of the luncheon itself in the corridor or the dressing room, available but not present, which is the particular professional invisibility that your work requires, and that you have become so accustomed to that you sometimes have to remind yourself you're still in the room when the room fills with other people. The guests include the Marchmont Bells, who are warm and slightly chaotic in the comfortable way of people who've been married a long time and no longer feel the need to present a performance of each other. A younger couple whose name you don't retain. A retired colonel who tells 3 stories about the Raj that are interesting the first time and less interesting by the third. And, notably, a woman named Mrs. Radcliffe who is, you learn from a conversation you happen to be near while you're adjusting the position of a flower arrangement, the secretary of something called the Ladies' Sanitary Association. This association you will later learn more about in the reading of a pamphlet that Mrs. Hartley Fenn will leave on her boudoir table, and that you will read one afternoon while you're waiting for a dress to dry, exists to promote sanitary reform as it affects women specifically, meaning public conveniences and clean water, and the kind of hygiene information that the official public health establishment has determined women need to receive from an appropriate source rather than from each other. The Ladies' Sanitary Association is one of the organisations through which, in this period, women are beginning to engage with the specific conditions of women's lives in a way that will eventually, over the next 40 or 50 years, produce the first commercial sanitary products sold with advertising that acknowledges what they are for, the first public acknowledgement that women's bodies have specific requirements that the public world should accommodate, the first hesitant steps toward the conversation that is currently completely impossible in this dining room where 12 people are eating pheasant. Mrs. Radcliffe is about 50, with the particular kind of very upright posture that speaks either of excellent personal discipline or a very tightly laced corset, and she says, at some point during the second course, something that makes the Colonel's wife look slightly uncomfortable, and Mrs. Hartley Fenn look interested. You're in the corridor, you hear it through the door. The question is not whether women need better provision, Mrs. Radcliffe says, but whether the men who control municipal budgets can be persuaded to think about it for more than 4 consecutive minutes. A small pause, then Mrs. Hartley Fenn says, they'd need to have thought about it for 4 consecutive minutes first. A laugh from Mrs. Marchmont Bell. A clearing of throat from the Colonel. You stand in the corridor, and you think about the municipal budget, about public conveniences, about the Ladies' Sanitary Association, about the pamphlet you haven't read yet but that you are now deciding you will read. Then you go to answer a knock at the back door that turns out to be a delivery of extra coal that was requested for the drawing-room fire, the management of daily life, and then January. January in London is not gentle. January in London is the month after the month that everyone spent pretending to be warmer and better nourished, and more celebratory than they actually were. And the result of this performance is a collective exhaustion that settles over the city like a second, grimmer fog. The social calendar, which reached its peak in December, contracts. The streets are quieter. The households that entertained in December now function with the reduced ambition of places that have done their performing and require recovery. Mrs. Hartley Fenn goes to Wiltshire to visit the cousin with the small handwriting, which means a week in which the household operates at a lower register, maintaining itself rather than demonstrating itself. The difference between the house as it performs for its owners and the house as it actually is when nobody is watching. You, as lady's maid, travel with her. This is the first time you've been outside London since you arrived in Kensington, and the journey by train from Paddington produces the particular experience of watching the city thin out through a window, the density of buildings giving way to suburbs and then to the brown January countryside with a speed that feels almost magical, as if the city is dissolving behind you rather than simply being left behind. The cousin, whose name is Mrs. Fairweather, lives in a house that is considerably older than the Pelham Crescent house, and considerably less convenient, being built in the 17th century when people apparently expected household staff to operate across considerable distances between the kitchen and the dining room, and thought nothing of providing the upper floors with heating arrangements that relied on fireplaces being maintained with coal carried up 3 flights of stairs. You carry the coal. This is not technically your job. But Mrs. Fairweather's household is smaller than Mrs. Hartley Fenn's, and the arrangements require flexibility, and you have spent enough time in enough houses to know that flexibility is the thing that makes the difference between a household that works and a household that doesn't. Your room in Wiltshire is in the old servants' wing, which dates from a period when servants were housed in conditions that reflected the assumption that servants didn't experience temperature the same way as their employers, which is a belief that has been disproven experimentally by every person who has ever slept in those rooms. It is very cold. There is a fireplace but insufficient coal to keep it burning overnight. You sleep in your clothes, adding your Sunday coat over the blanket, and you wake in the mornings with the slightly brittle quality of a person who's been cold all night, and whose body is prioritizing warmth above most other concerns. It is during the Wiltshire week that your next period begins. It begins on the 3rd day, which means you are not in London, not in your own attic room, not near the tin box under the loose board, though you have of course brought the tin box with you because you are 22 years old, and you did not get to be 22 years old and employed as a lady's maid in a good Kensington household by failing to anticipate the obvious. The tin box is in your bag. The Wiltshire week produces a specific challenge. The washing of the rags in a house where the laundry arrangements are less predictable and the privacy is less certain. Mrs. Fairweather's housekeeper is a woman named Mrs. Grout, who runs the house with the complete authority of someone who's been doing it for 20 years and considers it entirely her domain, which means that the kitchen and the laundry room and every other working part of the house are her territory in a way that is not hostile but is very much noticed. You manage. You always manage. The cold tap in the scullery, late enough in the evening that the scullery is empty, the rags wrung out and dried on the rail above the range where your own underclothes are also drying, indistinguishable from them unless someone is specifically looking. Mrs. Grout is not specifically looking, but she is a woman of 60 who's been managing households since she was 20, and you are fairly confident that she knows exactly what she is not specifically looking at. This is the network, the silent, parallel, never acknowledged network of women managing the same thing across every class and every household, knowing what each other knows without ever saying it, giving each other the small courtesies of not looking and not saying, that constitute the practical cooperation the official world neither sees nor sanctions. The Wiltshire weekends. The train brings you back through the contracting and then expanding cityscape, and then Paddington, and then Pelham Crescent, and the tin box goes back under the loose board, and the routine resumes with the relief of resumed routines. March. March is the month in which something happens that has not happened to you before, though it happens to women in service with some regularity, which is the reason it is known and discussed and prepared for in the way that women in service know and discuss and prepare for things, which is to say quietly and between themselves, and never at a volume or in terms that the official structure of the household would recognise. What happens is that Mrs. Hartley Fenn asks you, in a conversation that is brief and carefully worded, and in which neither of you says several things that are relevant to the conversation, whether you are well in general, and whether there is anything that you need. She doesn't specify what kind of anything. She doesn't need to. What she is doing, you understand after a moment, is making it possible for you to ask, if you need to ask, for the things that the official household provision does not cover, the things that are your own business, but that are also in the reality of a life lived in service. Partly the household's business too, because your capacity to do your work affects the household's functioning, and your capacity to do your work is affected by things that the household is not supposed to acknowledge. You think about what you need. You think about the cotton wool in the chemist box, the absorbent cotton wool for hygienic use that you looked at in November and didn't buy because 6p for a £0.5 was more than you wanted to spend. You think about the chloride of lime and the vinegar water and the Dr. Thompson's preparation and all the small material expenses of the management, which add up across a month to an amount that is noticeable on a £12 annual salary. You think about rest, about the 5 days of the first month when the first day was sharp and difficult, and you were on your feet from 5:45, carrying coal scuttles and flat irons and porcelain water jugs, and whether those 5 days, repeated 12 times a year across the entirety of your working life, add up to something that it might be reasonable to ask for accommodation of. You think about Mrs. Hartley Fenn's mother pressing the garnet brooch to her collar in defiance of the medical advice about tight jewellery during pregnancy, making no promises about the rest. You think about Bridget's valerian, offered across a kitchen table in the compressed vocabulary of women who speak without words. "I'm well, thank you, ma'am," you say. "I don't believe there's anything particular I need." A pause. "Very well," Mrs. Hartley Fenn says. "My offer stands, if that changes." "Thank you, ma'am." The conversation ends. Neither of you says what it was about. Both of you know what it was about. She goes to read her periodicals. You go to prepare the dress she'll wear this afternoon. The thing about the offer, and you think about this for the rest of the afternoon while you're performing the small operations of your job, is not that it will necessarily produce anything material. Women in your position don't commonly ask their employers for accommodations around their menstrual cycles. The language for it doesn't exist. The social permission for it doesn't exist. The very structure of service, which is built on the fiction of the perfectly functional invisible servant who does not have a body with its own requirements, makes the asking of such things very difficult. But the offer exists, and the offer, even unacted upon, changes something. It means that in this particular household, in this particular relationship between this particular employer and this particular employee, there is a small recognition, a small, private, entirely unofficial recognition that what you are managing is real, and that it costs you something, and that the person whose household runs on the fuel of your labour knows this and has chosen to acknowledge it in the only way the social structure allows, which is obliquely in a conversation about whether you need anything. It's not enough. It is nowhere near enough. The entire social and medical apparatus of the country is lined up against the notion that it should be anything at all, that women should expect accommodation for what is, after all, simply how women's bodies work, simply the ordinary business of being female in a physical sense, the same business that has been conducted by every woman who has ever lived and managed, apparently without the official world's assistance, for the entirety of human history. But it's something. You fold the dress, you check the buttons, every button present. April comes, the light changes. The coal fires in the house are lit less frequently as the weeks progress, and one morning in mid-April you go to lay the fire in Mrs. Hartley Fenn's room and stop yourself, because the room is actually warm, a warmth that has arrived from somewhere without the fire's help, the particular warmth of a London April when spring has decided to be real rather than provisional. This is, in the domestic vocabulary of the household, an event. The day the fires stop being necessary is the day the winter's management is officially concluded. It will mean different things to different members of the household. For Mrs. Pierce, it will mean a slightly less urgent coal inventory and a renegotiation of the morning cooking schedule. For Jenny, it will mean fewer coal scuttles carried from the basement to the upper floors. For Bridget, it will mean the laundry dries faster. For you, it will mean that the attic room is not cold at 5:45 in the morning. You stand in Mrs. Hartley Fenn's room with the coal scuttle in your hand and the fire unlit, and you look out the window at the April light, which is doing that specific thing that April light does, coming in at an angle that makes ordinary objects briefly extraordinary. The white paint on the window frame almost glowing, the dust motes in the air suddenly visible, each one a small planet in its own system. The room is warm. You're standing in it. The fire doesn't need to be lit. Small triumph. You set the coal scuttle down, go to draw the curtains, begin the day. It is June before anything changes in the way that things change, when the official world becomes briefly, inadequately responsive to something that the unofficial world has known about for a very long time. The Ladies' Sanitary Association pamphlet that you read in Mrs. Hartley Fenn's boudoir in January, the one that Mrs. Radcliffe left behind after the December luncheon, contained information that was not exactly news to you, but that was expressed in language you had not previously encountered. Clinical, practical, addressed to women as if they were capable of receiving medical information about their own bodies and using it sensibly. The pamphlet discussed menstrual hygiene. It discussed, with more directness than you had previously seen in print, the existing management practices, the flannel rags, the cotton wadding, the various preparations sold by chemists. It discussed the theories about cold water and warm water, presenting them as theories rather than facts, noting that the medical evidence for the more alarming claims was, to put it diplomatically, not established. It also discussed a development that was, at the time of the pamphlet's writing, still mostly prospective: the commercial sanitary product. The possibility of a standardized, commercially produced pad or towel for menstrual management, made of absorbent material, designed for single use, or at minimum easier cleaning than the flannel rag, available through chemists or by postal order in discreet packaging. This product will exist, commercially, within the decade. It will be called Lister's Towels, named after the same Joseph Lister who gave his name to antisepsis, and it will be made of gauze-wrapped cotton wadding, sold in boxes of 12, available from selected chemists at a price that puts it outside the reach of most working women, but within the reach of the lower middle class. It will be sold under the category of surgical supplies, because selling it under any category that acknowledges its specific purpose would require that purpose to be acknowledged, which remains, in 1883, absolutely not possible. By the time it is commercially available, you will have been using the flannel rag system for 13 years. You will be in your mid-20s. You will have managed 12 times a year for 13 years with whatever was available and whatever precautions seemed necessary and whatever accommodations your situation permitted. You will have washed flannel in cold water in the dark in laundry rooms and sculleries and back kitchens in Surrey and Kensington and Wiltshire, and at least one other house that you will spend 3 months in between one job and the next. You will have bought Dr. Thompson's preparation and chloride of lime and lavender water and vinegar and valerian from Bridget, and small measures of patience from yourself, and you will have gone through the whole business 12 times a year without once going mad from blood ascending to your brain, because that particular medical theory, whatever Dr. Anstey says at the Royal Institution, was never, in any particular instance of any woman's life, actually true. But the world changes slowly. The world's official acknowledgement of what women manage changes slower than that. And in the meantime, there is the work. The daily work of existence, which includes the daily work of existing in a body that does what bodies do, managed with the resources available, in the social conditions that exist, with the kind of quiet competence that nobody writes about and everybody depends on. The June morning when this particular summer arrives at number 14, Pelham Crescent, is the kind of morning that June in London occasionally produces by way of apology for everything else it inflicts on the city. Actual sunshine, warm rather than hot, the kind of air that smells of something other than coal smoke for a few hours before the general London atmosphere reasserts itself. You're in Mrs. Hartley Fenn's dressing room. The window is open, which is possible in June in a way it isn't possible in November, and the sounds of the Crescent come in. A delivery cart, someone calling to someone else, the sound of a garden somewhere nearby where a lawn is being cut. Mrs. Hartley Fenn is at her writing desk. She's been there since after breakfast, working on something that she has not described to you, but that involves the kind of sustained concentration that means she doesn't need you for anything immediate. You're mending. The particular mending you're doing is of a small tear in the hem of her dark blue wool dress, the one she wore throughout the autumn and winter, with the frequency of a garment that has become a default. The tear occurred when the hem caught on the corner of the drawing-room hearthguard during the January visit of the Marchmont Bells, and it has been waiting for this moment of available attention. You're sitting near the open window. The needle goes in and out of the wool with the rhythm of someone who's been doing this since childhood. Small, even stitches that will be invisible once the hem is laid flat. Outside, the morning is proceeding. A sparrow has appeared on the windowsill and is looking at you with the specifically judgmental quality that sparrows have, as if they are perpetually being asked to evaluate something they find mildly disappointing. You look at it. It looks at you. Then it decides the windowsill is insufficient and goes somewhere else. The stitching continues. This is also the work. This is what the work looks like when it's quiet. Not the rushed morning management, not the public-facing efficiency of the woman who glides through the household, leaving things correct in her wake, but this, sitting near an open window on a June morning mending a hem, with the sounds of the crescent coming in, and the needle going steadily in and out, and the particular piece of a task that requires only hands and patience, and can be done without the part of your mind that usually needs to be alert remaining at full alert. It is not exactly rest. You are working. But it is the kind of working that is close enough to rest that the distinction, on a June morning with a window open, doesn't much matter. Your back is not aching. You're in the part of the month that has nothing particular to manage. Just ordinary existence in an ordinary body doing ordinary things. You think about the month since November, the management, the logistics, the underground economy of women's knowledge and the small courtesies of not looking and not saying, the cold water in the laundry room, the lavender water, the tin box, the loose board, the 6 pence for the cotton wool that you eventually bought on a February afternoon, and that made the February management slightly more straightforward. The Dr. Thompson's preparation, the valerian, all of this, month after month, year after year, for as long as this body continues to do what it does, which will be another 30 years at minimum, 12 times a year, managed in the margins of a working life. You think about the women who came before you, your mother being told to tell no one, her mother being told the same. All the way back as far as you can imagine or further, women managing this particular fact of their existence in whatever way the world they lived in made possible, with whatever was available, in whatever privacy the social structure of their time permitted. Greek women probably wrapping wool around something, Roman women, possibly the same. Medieval women, something that the historical record declines to be specific about. The women of every century and every country, each managing the management, none of it easy, none of it officially acknowledged, all of it necessary. And the theories, changing from century to century, from the religious impurity of the ancient texts to the humoral theories of the medieval physicians, to the nervous constitution theories of the Victorian ones, each set of theories reflecting the specific anxieties of its time rather than the actual biology of the women whose bodies were being theorized about. The cold water theory will not survive the century. By the early 20th century, the medical consensus will have shifted enough that the explicit prohibition against bathing will have quietly disappeared from most domestic advice literature, replaced by gentler suggestions about warmth and rest that are still not entirely accurate but are at least not actively harmful. By the mid-20th century, women will be told they can bathe, exercise, work, do all the things they have always in fact been doing without official permission. None of this is news you have right now. What you have right now is June 1883 and a window and a sparrow that has briefly reconsidered its assessment of the windowsill and returned. The needle goes in, the needle comes out. Outside, someone is laughing at something in the street below. You think about all the women, all the years, all the months, all the management conducted in silence across everything, and you think, this is what the world is actually made of. Not the official version, not the medical journals and the Royal Institution lectures and the advice manuals and the 6-shilling Harley Street consultations. Not those. The other thing, the actual thing. The tin box under the loose board, Bridget's valerian, Mrs. Hartley Fenn's mother wearing the garnet brooch and making no promises about the rest, the cold tap in the laundry room at 8 o'clock in the evening, you, sitting by a window in June, mending a dress, thinking about all of it. This, the stitch goes in, the stitch comes out. The sparrow has found something more interesting on the windowsill. A crumb, maybe, or just a specific quality of June morning light that speaks to whatever sparrows find worth investigating. The wool in your hands is warm from the handling, worn soft in the places where the hem has rubbed against shoe leather over months of wearing, and you follow the repair around the curve of it with the careful attention of someone who knows that the work done invisible is still work done, is still work that matters, is still the substance of something. The dress will be right, every button present, seams held, everything as it should be, and nothing to show how it got that way. You push the last stitch through, draw the thread tight, cut it close to the fabric, and fold the hem back flat and press it with your thumbnail to set it in place. Done. You hold the dress up to the light and check along the line of the repair, turning it slowly. Nothing, not a mark, not a pucker. The mend is invisible. You fold the dress over the back of the chair where it was before, smoothing the shoulders flat. Then you sit in the June morning near the open window, and for a moment you don't pick up anything else. You just sit. Outside, the crescent continues its mourning. The delivery cart has moved on. The garden somewhere near still has someone cutting the lawn. The sparrow has gone somewhere more interesting. The London June morning is doing what it does, which is existing with the slightly tentative quality of good weather in a city that is not entirely sure it deserves it. Your body is quiet, just itself, just the ordinary weight and warmth of sitting in a chair in a warm room on a June morning. Your back doesn't ache, your hands are still. You think, without quite meaning to, about all the mornings that started differently. The November cold and the tin box and the monitoring. The particular kind of attention you carry, those 5 days of every month, like a second task running parallel to every other task, always present, always quiet, always there. And then you stop thinking about it, because from the other room there is the sound of Mrs. Hartley Fenn's chair pushing back from the writing desk, and the sound of her coming to the door, and she will need something, or she will want to discuss something she's written, or she'll simply appear in the doorway with the particular look of someone who has been thinking for a while, and is now ready to have a different kind of thinking. You straighten. You pick up the thread and the needle and the scissors, and you set them in their proper places in the sewing box, ready. Agnes. Mum? She's in the doorway. She looks at the folded dress on the chair. She looks at you. Is it done? Yes, Mum. The hem is repaired. She comes into the room, picks up the dress, shakes it out, examines the hemline with the eye of a woman who's been having her clothes made and maintained by professionals her entire adult life, and knows what right looks like. Good, she says. She says it simply. Just good. She puts the dress down. She goes to the window and looks out at the June morning. I've been writing to the Ladies' Sanitary Association, she says. You look at her. I've offered them the use of the drawing room for a meeting in July, she continues. Mrs. Radcliffe is organising a discussion on the provision of certain hygienic facilities in public establishments, and I believe it will be useful to have it somewhere that has a good table and doesn't charge for the room. A pause. I thought it might interest you to help arrange the room for it. You understand what she is saying and what she is not saying, and the precise distance between those two things, which is the whole of the territory they inhabit together, the whole of what is possible between these two women in this particular time and place and social arrangement. She is offering you the meeting, the conversation, the women who are beginning, in the only way currently available to them, to address the official world with the unofficial world's knowledge. I would be glad to help, Ma'am, you say. She nods, looks back out the window. Good, she says again. And they stay like that for a moment, the two of them, on the June morning, in the warm room with the window open. And this too is what the world is made of. This exactly. The evening after the meeting, which is a Tuesday evening in July, you lie in your attic room, and the room is not cold because it is July, and the window is open, and the London summer night does what London summer nights do, which is remain warm and slightly noisy and completely uncommitted to the idea of full dark until very late. You're thinking about the women who came to the meeting. 11 of them, in Mrs. Hartley Fenn's drawing room, sitting in the chairs you arranged and drinking the tea that was served from the good service. Mrs. Radcliffe, upright and precise, and entirely comfortable with the expression on the retired colonel's wife's face when she described, in terms that were clinical but not oblique, the specific deficiencies of the current provision for women's hygienic needs in public London. Other women, some of them employed, like you, some of them of Mrs. Hartley Fenn's class. One woman who introduced herself as a district nurse and spoke about what she saw in the household she visited with a directness that produced a brief silence before the conversation resumed. The district nurse's name was Edith Townsend. She had the hands of a person who works with their hands, and the manner of someone who has stopped having patience for the gap between how things are and how they should be. She said, among other things, that she visited households in which women had no access to any form of absorbent material adequate for menstrual management, and that she had seen infections and complications arising from inadequate management in conditions of poverty that were entirely preventable and entirely the result of the official world's refusal to acknowledge the problem. She said it clearly, in a drawing room, with tea. The drawing room didn't fall down. The social order didn't collapse. Mrs. Radcliffe didn't require smelling salts. The conversation continued. You served the tea. You refilled the cups when they were empty. You were invisible in exactly the way your training required, the perfectly functioning mechanism of the household, and you heard every word. You think about Edith Townsend now, in the July night, about the household she visits, about the women in those households managing the same management with considerably fewer resources than you have, with the same prohibition against cold water, and the same silence and the same accumulated knowledge of what actually helps, passed woman to woman across whatever social structure permits it. You think about the millions of women doing this specific thing right now, tonight, in houses and tenements and attic rooms and shared beds across London, across England, across the world, each one managing, each one working within the constraints of what is available and what is permitted and what is believed to be dangerous. The official world believes so many wrong things, but the unofficial world keeps working. Your room is warm, the window is open. You can hear the city, slightly muffled by the summer night, the last sounds of working day giving way to the particular sounds of evening, carriages and distant voices, and somewhere a cat who has strong feelings about something in the alley below. Tomorrow, Mrs. Hartley Fenn will need to be dressed for her morning calls. The dress she has chosen is the one you repaired in June, the dark blue wool, which she continues to wear because it is comfortable and well made, and has no missing buttons and sits correctly on her shoulders, and you will help her into it with the same efficiency you always have, and she will go out into the London morning looking exactly as she should, and you will manage whatever the day requires. Which is all, which is everything, which is the work. Your eyes are heavy. The city does what the city does at night, which is continue slightly quieter, still there. Somewhere out there, a woman is lying awake in the particular alertness of the first night, knowing what she knows before she opens her eyes, calculating what she will need, and where she will get it, and when she will be able to attend to it, and how she will carry the rest of the day alongside it. Somewhere out there, a woman is managing in the dark the specific logistics that require to be managed in the dark. Somewhere out there, Bridget's valerian is doing its work in a cup of late-night tea. Somewhere out there, a cold tap in a basement laundry room is running, and hands are working in the cold, and nothing is ascending to anyone's brain. Somewhere out there, a tin box is under a loose floorboard. This is what the world is made of. Not the official version, the actual version. And the actual version has been continuous and quiet and capable and entirely unacknowledged for as long as there have been women with bodies that do this particular thing, which is longer than the official medical literature has been paying attention. Much longer. Your breathing slows. The July night is warm around you, and the open window lets in the sound of the city doing what it always does, and the last thing you're aware of is the particular quality of warmth that exists when you are in a bed in summer, and the day is finished and the work is done and you have done what you needed to do, and you will do it again tomorrow and the next day and the day after and all the days, and none of it is going to break you, because it hasn't broken anyone who came before, and they are the evidence, all of them, the ones who left no record, who are written in nothing but the continuous fact of their having been here and having managed and having passed the knowledge on, warm enough, safe enough, here. Centuries will pass, the London you know will change beyond recognition, the fog will be legislated away, the coal fires replaced by gas and then electricity, the horses giving way to machines that make a different kind of noise and a different kind of smell. The Hartley Fen house will be subdivided into flats, or pulled down, or converted to something entirely different. The Pelham Crescent will still be there, because London keeps its bones, and the bones of this crescent are good Georgian stone that will outlast everything that has ever happened inside it. The attic room will still be there, the loose board maybe, or something that was once a loose board and has been repaired and changed until it is merely a place on a floor. The window, smaller than the windows below, looking out onto the same strip of sky. But the women who sleep in rooms like that one will be different women. They will have access to things you spent 6 pence on, and considered a luxury and thought carefully about, and they will not think carefully about them. They will simply buy them at a pharmacy that is well lit and unremarkable, and the transaction will not require carefully constructed language or careful facial arrangements, because the products will have names, and the names will be printed on packaging, and the packaging will be on the shelves in plain sight. They will be able to bathe. Nobody will tell them not to. The theory that cold water drives blood inward toward the brain will have been understood as wrong, not through dramatic scientific refutation, but through the slow accumulation of the irrefutable evidence that women have always constituted. We bathed in cold water anyway, and nothing happened except that we were clean. The uterus and the brain will be understood eventually to coexist without competition for resources. The rest cure will be understood as a treatment that was mostly harmful and was prescribed largely to women who resisted the idea that their minds were secondary to their bodies, and who are then given a condition that made them secondary to their bodies in the most complete way possible. Women will work through the whole thing from beginning to end 12 times a year the way they have always worked, and the world will eventually, slowly, inadequately but genuinely, begin to arrange itself around this fact rather than around a fiction that the fact does not exist. But some things will not change. The knowing, before you open your eyes, that will not change. The first morning, the careful calculation of time and resources, that will not change. The small courtesies between women, the shared knowledge, the particular vocabulary of not saying that nonetheless communicates exactly what needs to be communicated, that will not change. The work, the ordinary, continuous, invisible, indispensable work of existing in a body that does what bodies do, in a world that requires you to do everything else at the same time, that will not change. People will still lie in rooms at the end of long days. The city will still do what cities do at night. The need for rest at the end of work will not change. The particular weight of a body that has been upright and functional for 14 hours will not change. The brief piece of horizontal and warm and done, however temporarily with the day, that will not change either. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took Agnes Whitmore in her attic room in 1882, in the way it has taken women in attic rooms and back bedrooms and shared beds and servants' quarters and all the other places where the people who make the houses run lay down at the end of the day and let the exhaustion do its work. Let the sounds of whatever city you're in fade into the sounds of almost sleep. Let the thoughts soften and slow and become less insistent. Let your body, which has been carrying you through the day, through every kind of day, the easy days and the difficult ones, the days that required more than you thought you had, and the days that were only ordinary, let it do the one thing it has always known how to do without instruction. Rest. You've earned it. Whatever you managed today, whatever you carried, whatever you did quietly and without acknowledgement and will do again tomorrow, you earned this. Take it. The city is out there, continuing. It will be there in the morning. The work will be there in the morning. The tin box and the loose board and the cold tap and all of it will be there in the morning, and you will manage it as you have always managed it, with the resources available to you and the knowledge you have and the particular quiet competence that nobody writes about and everyone depends on. But that's tomorrow. Tonight there is just this, the warmth, the quiet, the slow drift toward the place where everything that requires managing manages itself. Good night.